Welcome to Growing Pains, a podcast of the Sumner County Republican Freedom Caucus. I'm your host, Deanne DeWitt. Today we are joined by Chancellor of the Sumner County Chancery Court, Louis Oliver.
Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon. You know, it could be 3 a.m. when somebody listens to this. So,
right.
And you're going to start listening to it too. I think that's what you just told me off air. Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh so loud, but goodness. Well, thank you for joining me today. We are, I hope to cover a lot of ground kind of quickly. So that might not be easy, but maybe now we should just plan for our second follow-up episode 2 with you. But okay. So by way of, just quick introduction, I know you had a law practice for several decades. You operated out of the historic Hazel Path property, served as city manager in Hendersonville, been very involved in the Bar Association. I'm sure all sorts of other community and civic organizations, but also a Rotarian for over 5 decades, which there's a lot to that. And I would love to explore some of what that means to you. But overall, you are widely respected for your historical knowledge, maybe not a formal historian, but someone who really can shed light on a lot. So I'm going to have you start by telling listeners, what's a chancellor?
Well, a chancellor is a state court judge in Tennessee. It is an elected position. As you're aware, I was elected in 2014 as chancellor. When Tom Gray retired, Tom Gray served for 28 years as chancellor. I'm in my 12th year. Chancellor is, again, one of the elected state court judges. You have chancellor, you have a circuit judge. In this case, we now have 2 circuit judges, and you have a criminal judge. That's 4 state court judges now serving Sumner County. Sumner County is a 1-county district. Some counties or some districts in Tennessee have as many as 8 counties that are served by 1 set of judges. In this case, we're lucky because we only have 1 county to serve. We don't have to travel back and forth between various counties. In fact, one of the districts goes all the way from the Kentucky line to the Mississippi line in serving a particular judicial district. But nevertheless, that's not what you asked. The chancellor is the only judge mentioned in the state constitution. It refers to chancellor as well as other inferior courts. Now, some chancellors interpret that to mean that we are certainly superior to the circuit and criminal judges, but we don't, under the law, basically operate that way. And a chancellor was created from Old England. Back in Old England, the king was in charge of everything, and the king was in charge of making decisions on behalf of his or her constituents. And because it became so burdensome that the king certainly didn't have the time to try to resolve disputes that occurred between various constituents. And so the king appointed chancellors. And that's where the term came from. And the chancellor basically was to do what's right. When you hear the problems that people get into, you attempt to do what's right. Now, and when it was set up in the state constitution, that's what was intended. But now, certainly, the chancellors, just like the circuit courts, have to follow the law. But in this case, it carried over from Old England and carried over into the Tennessee Constitution, which was adopted sometime around 1796. And we still have chancellors. Now, most chancellors in other states have been done away with. I think there's probably 4 or 5 states that still have chancellors.
Interesting.
Where in Tennessee, we still have it. It's still in the state constitution. So to eliminate the chancellors and to combine them with circuit courts would require a constitutional change in Tennessee, and certainly a vote of the legislature and a vote of the people to amend the Constitution. But in essence, I hear basically the same type cases that are heard in circuit court. But I hear all of the probate in Sumner County. If somebody dies in Sumner County and their will is to be probated or their estate is to be probated, if they have no will, I'll hear it. If we have conservators appointed, I will hear it, or I will have my clerk and master hear it. Guardianships, just about anything to do, in fact, everything to do with probate and trusts will be cases that I will hear. I will hear many of the divorces, unfortunately, here in Sumner County, maybe as many as a third to 40% of the divorces, contract disputes, real estate disputes, just about any kind of dispute that might occur, except for cases involving unliquidated damages. And I'm sure you know what that means.
I'm thinking if I can figure it out, unliquidated damages.
Well,
okay.
Let me tell you what it means. When you sign a contract with someone, or a person signs a contract, that contract, if it's violated or if it's breached, there will be a certain element of damage that can be recovered by the aggrieved party. That is liquidated damages. On the other hand, if you're involved in a slip and fall accident, an automobile, motor vehicle accident, or some other type of tort where you're suing for $1 million or because you received an injury, those are unliquidated damages. You can't determine what your damages are by any documents you've entered into. And so the circuit court hears unliquidated damage cases. That would be the type cases I just spoke of, where the Chancery Court will hear liquidated damages, which are contracts and things of that nature. Now, most people don't think about that. A lot of lawyers don't think about it, but that's how the Chancery Court is separated from the circuit court and criminal court. Now, you also have a circuit court clerk, which serves as circuit court clerk, criminal court clerk, juvenile court clerk, general sessions court clerk. The Chancery Court has its own clerk, and it's appointed by the Chancellor. I've appointed Mark Smith to 2 terms as clerk and master. Clerk and master serves 6-year terms appointed by the Chancellor, and where the circuit clerk, which is Catherine Strong, is elected by the people. So there is a difference there.
There is. And, I know more than many, maybe, about how some of this all works, but I just learned something. And I learned a dose of history, which is kind of
that's basically how it's all set up. Now, at some point in the future, there'll probably be an attempt to combine the Chancery Court with the Circuit Court, but at this point, it's not happened in Tennessee.
Interesting. Yeah, that whole constitutional amendment is...
Now, I will point out one other thing that occurs. When there is a conflict between a judge, for example, a criminal has a conflict that might exist between the criminal judge and someone accused of a crime, it's possible I may hear, even though I'm the chancellor, I may hear criminal cases. From time to time, I hear jury criminal cases. And I act in that case as the criminal judge as opposed to chancellor. And from time to time, other judges will hear chancery cases. Now, at this point, we've had a newly appointed judge, Jennifer Nichols, who was appointed last year, and I'm assigning her 1/3 of my non-probate chancery cases. And so she sits as chancellor on occasion, hearing cases that are assigned to her by the Chancery Court.
Got it.
But again, it's a lot of that's just details, but that's how we operate.
If I'm not mistaken, adoptions are part of your sphere as well.
All right. Chancery Court as well as Circuit Court handle adoptions. Now, there has been some question raised about why juvenile court doesn't handle them, but in essence, right now, the state law dictates that circuit and chancery courts handle adoptions. Juvenile court can terminate parental rights. What that means is there's 2 steps typically to an adoption case. One is the biological parents' rights, which are superior rights to anyone else to these children. Their rights have to be terminated. And there are certain factors that the court has to consider in terminating those rights. So those rights have to be terminated first. They can be terminated by juvenile, chancery, or circuit court, but only adoptions can be heard in circuit and chancery court. So I'll do adoptions, maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 adoptions a week that are brought in by various attorneys. Some attorneys specialize in adoptions, and they bring those adoptions to us.
Is there a certain type of case that you enjoy the most?
I enjoy probate a lot more than I enjoy giving somebody a divorce. I'll just be honest about that. Most judges are not very inclined to want to hear domestic relations cases, even though that's part of my job, and I hear them regularly. But certainly I enjoy the probate part. I enjoy the adoptions most because that's a happy time. Yeah. But as far as the intricacies of type cases I hear, I prefer the probate cases over the domestic relations and some of the contract cases.
Okay. Well, you've been at it for a while, so I'm glad that we talked about this. I'm glad we got a little the history lesson and a clarification of how that part of the system works. And Mr. Mark Smith, of course, I see him a lot, and I always fail to remember his exact title. So maybe I'll get it right after this. Clerk and Master. Is there a short name for that? Is there like an abbreviated title?
C&M, but Clerk and Master is what you call it. And we very seldom will reduce that reference. But Mr. Smith ran against me when I ran for Chancellor. And when I took office, the Clerk and Master was not an attorney. And once they're 6-year terms, and once that term expired, I made it known I wanted to appoint an attorney. And I spoke to some attorneys around about it, not necessarily offering them the job, but says, what do you think about having a Clerk and Master that's an attorney? And most of them agreed. And when I threw that line out, they start thinking, maybe I'd like to be the Clerk and Master, because that Clerk and Master job is a county constitutional position. So it has a very well-funded salary. Plus, a Clerk and Master can get up to 3% of any property that the court order sold. So if I order a piece of property sold, meaning a real estate, a house, for example, then the Clerk and Master, if I sell it through the court, can receive up to a 3% commission in addition to their salary.
Well, that's an interesting little tidbit.
Most people don't know that, but that's how that works. And so there have been Clerk and Masters, not here, but other places, that have made significant commissions in the sale of real estate through the court, and industrial sites and big parcels of property where it's multi-million-dollar sales. It can be quite a commission earned by a Clerk and Master.
Interesting. All right, let's shift gears a little bit.
All right.
Let's talk about some of the history and things that you've witnessed. If you think back to what Sumner County was like earlier in your career, what do you think would most surprise today's residents, or maybe the transplants that have no context for what Sumner County has come from and where we are now?
Well, I don't know that I can respond specifically to that question, but I can recall back in when I was a child, small child, Hendersonville oriented itself more toward Gallatin than Nashville. Gallatin was the county seat. Gallatin was certainly an established town long before Hendersonville had any significant population. I can remember going on the square, and it'd be huge crowds gathered around on the square on a Saturday afternoon. My dad would take me up there just so he could join the crowd, and we would buy popcorn at the little popcorn stand that's there on the square, and everybody would visit. Well, people don't do that anymore. It had been done for years, but now people in Hendersonville, in my opinion, orient themselves much more so to Nashville and Davidson County than they do Gallatin and Sumner County. Gallatin and Hendersonville were rivals. I mean, it was a significant rival long, some 50, 60 years ago. Gallatin had a high school. Hendersonville didn't have a high school. Hendersonville's high school was built and opened up, I believe, in 1941, and my dad was in the first graduating class. And so when people were in Hendersonville were typically going to Gallatin High School. And so when they opened Hendersonville High School, they told them that you can either go to Hendersonville or you remain at Gallatin. My dad and many others chose to go to the new Hendersonville High School, while some remained in Gallatin, but that developed a significant rivalry between the two high schools, which bled over into rivalry in the towns. Even though Hendersonville was a few hundred people and Gallatin was an established, county seat and established town. But that was, in my recollection, that was a significant issue. There are many people now in Hendersonville never come to Gallatin. I've talked to people and I say, well, did you go to Gallatin to get your tags? I said, go to Gallatin to get my tags. I get my tags here in Hendersonville at the place, and people just don't orient themselves at all. Many don't, to Gallatin as opposed to Nashville, where it used to be. Gallatin was where everybody went.
That's a really interesting.
Well, that's just the way
point
it
of
was.
emphasis.
And Sumner County, when I grew up, I looked at the Collier's Encyclopedia. People go around and sell these encyclopedias. My family bought one. And the population listed in Hendersonville in 1950 was 600 people. And that was almost out to Long Hollow Pike in that whole area. Well, now it's 60,000 people. And so, I've seen that significant change. And with that change in population, certainly the change in just the appearance of the town and the appearance of the facilities is overwhelming, really. But Hendersonville probably has changed more over that period of time than just about any other town in Tennessee, I would think, just because of the change in population.
Yeah. Well, this may be kind of a tough question, but when you think of these different cycles of growth and maybe the resistance to some of that growth and then adaptation and going from 600 to 60,000 as a monumental kind of growth, can you reflect on phases throughout that cycle that maybe felt more organic and natural versus an alternative?
I can certainly identify things that occurred that I've observed. I was the city manager in Hendersonville. You mentioned that. And I was city manager from 1973 to 1982. And that was a period of significant change in Hendersonville. I conducted the first census for the city in Hendersonville. I was fresh out of college, didn't have a steady job. The first city manager was a man named Sam Walton, and Sam Walton hired me to do the first city census. There were a lot of people that did not want to be in the city. They had moved out of Nashville, predominantly moved out of Davidson County to get away from the taxes, to get away from the population growth, to get away from the school systems in Davidson County, and moved to Hendersonville. They felt they were moving out in the country. So here comes the city following them out there, the city being the city of Hendersonville. So the first census I did indicated Hendersonville had some 17,000 people. That was in about 1972. And there are many people that ran me off their porch. We sent out questionnaires to people saying, answer how many people live in your house.
Right.
And a few mundane questions, but mainly, how many people live there and how old are they? Well, there's a lot of people refused to cooperate, refused to answer, and those that refused to answer, we'd have to go out and knock on their door. I had some people working for me, but we'd go out and knock on the door, and they would practically run us off the porch. Didn't want the city there. But nevertheless, what happened is one huge annexation in about 1972, in February of 1972, actually. The city moved from a population of a few hundred people, meaning the actual municipal population, annexed a large area of Hendersonville, and those people overnight were part of the city of Hendersonville. So it went from a few hundred to 17,000 overnight. And a lot of people weren't happy with that.
Wow.
But that's sort of the history of what took place. And the first city election was in 1969. There had been a city chartered. It was challenged in court. It was set aside, and it was reincorporated. And finally, the second incorporation of Hendersonville stood through the Tennessee Supreme Court. and in 1969, the first city election. Well, a man named Lewis Oliver was elected as, got the most votes in the first city election. Well, it's not this Lewis Oliver, it's my grandfather. My grandfather was Lewis Oliver Sr., I'm Lewis Oliver III, and my grandfather got the most votes in the first city election ever held in Hendersonville. So when the first city commission, it was called a city commission of 3 people, gathered together, they looked at my grandfather and said, Mr. Oliver, you're going to be the first mayor of Hendersonville. And he said, no, he said, I'm not. He says, I'm a carpenter. I'm not a politician. I'm not going to accept being the first mayor because he got the most votes. So it went then to a man named Ed Cisco. Ed Cisco was an electrician, ran Cisco Electric. They said, all right, Ed, you're going to be the mayor of Hendersonville. Ed says, I'm an electrician. I'm not a politician. I'm not going to accept being mayor. Well, L.H. Dink Newman was the third one elected. And Dink was a politician of sorts. He'd been on the school board. He'd been on the county commission. And so Dink Newman then, of the three vote getters, got the fewest number of votes, but he became the first mayor of Hendersonville. And so that's how that first city commission was set up. And that probably tells you how I wound up with some connection to the city by doing the first census, because my grandfather got the most votes in the first city election. And I'll tell one other story, and you may not want to hear stories, but I'll tell this anyway. Stories.
And I know our listeners will too, so keep it going.
Dink Newman was also the first graduate of Hendersonville High School. So you've got a man who was the first mayor of Hendersonville, but he had also been the first graduate of Hendersonville High School. And people say, well, how do you know that? How did that happen? Well, Hendersonville High School had opened in 1941, and they were in high school. Dink was older than the other students in the senior class. He had maybe, I don't know why, but he was a couple of years older. He was also the assistant football coach in addition to being a student. But nevertheless, as they were going through the senior year, you had Pearl Harbor that occurred in December of 1941, and the draft began very aggressively being enforced throughout the country, including Tennessee. And Dink got his draft notice because he was quite a bit older than the others, and they gave him a draft notice. And so the principal, Mr. Hawkins, who the Hawkins School in Hendersonville is named for, V.G. Hawkins, was the principal of Hendersonville High School. He said, Dink, I'm going to give you your diploma so that when you go into the service, because he was being drafted out of high school, when you go into service, you can tell them you're a high school graduate. That might help you some. And so they gave Dink, Mr. Hawkins gave Dink his diploma, and that was the first diploma issued out of Hendersonville High School. So he became the first graduate of Hendersonville High School, and then by chance became the first mayor of Hendersonville as well.
It's a good bit of history. I love it.
Well, that happened.
So what do you think we gain from growth?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer.
Sure.
I think it obviously enhances the facilities available to people. I mean, we all hear about the housing crisis. You have some of it here in Sumner County, certainly. You certainly hear about it in Davidson County. I want to say that growth is almost inevitable, and you have to keep the facilities. There are many facilities in Hendersonville that just not have kept up with the growth that's been allowed. I think that's one of the problems. Yeah. It's hard for me to criticize, and I don't want to criticize any of the existing people in leadership roles in Hendersonville, for example. And I talk more of Hendersonville than I do Gallatin because I have more knowledge about it. But I think that the growth brings the enhancement of the facilities as long as they're able to keep it up. One of the examples, and this is a coincidence, but it's true, I represented a number of people in Hendersonville throughout the years as a lawyer. I practiced law for 32 years before I was elected chancellor, and been city manager 10 years before that. So I had a great deal of knowledge about it and had represented a number of cities throughout Middle Tennessee in other cases. But one example is that a friend of mine that I went to high school with, is now deceased, owned a significant piece of property north of the bypass, north of Hendersonville. And as a subdivision named Autumn Creek was being developed adjacent to it, I assisted him in being sure that the utilities were sized sufficiently to accommodate his property in the installation of various utilities, water and sewer primarily, in the adjoining subdivision. A lot of the growth in the past has not attempted to accommodate future growth. So if they allowed a subdivision to be built, they would just require the developer to put in utilities big enough to handle that subdivision. But what are you going to do about the property next door? Or down the street? And so now there's much greater effort toward being sure that as these utilities are developed, they're developed in such a way that it would accommodate the future use of the adjoining properties or the properties down the street. Now, some people don't like that. I know some on the county commission don't like that, but we have to accommodate that future growth. And there are negatives certainly that come with it, many negatives that come with it. But then, in my opinion, the positives outweigh that, and you've got to plan for it. We can't be in an area like Nashville and not anticipate that we're going to get significant growth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think most Sumner Countyans like to feel separate and, distinctly different from Nashville. We have this little bubble, this little beautiful slice of America and iconic beauty, or idyllic beauty is the word I was looking for. But we are still part of the Nashville region, and that's just an inevitable thing that I think we would prefer not to associate with, but it has those implications that we can't avoid.
Well, and there are zoning regulations and to some extent utility regulations that can slow it, but it's ultimately going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, the density, sometimes I'm not happy with the densities that are sometimes developed, but nevertheless, I don't, there are much smarter people than me that are trying to address those problems, but I think it's inevitable that we're going to have to deal with the growth.
Yeah, a lot of trade-offs. If you could, somewhat succinctly, because I want to cover a couple more things before we run out of time. The city manager role, that's evolved over the years in Hendersonville. Gallatin doesn't yet have a city manager position. Any insight there that you see compels the city to go that direction, and advice from your observations over the years?
Well, I was city manager in Hendersonville, as I indicated, for about 10 years, nine or 10 years. The city manager role was the chief executive officer of the city. It's patterned after a corporate role. In other words, your elected officials, in this case the city commissioners, serve as the board of directors. The mayor is the chairman of the board. Then they hire a CEO who's the president of the corporation, so to speak, in this case the city manager, to run the city. The city manager hires the police chief, hires the fire chief, hires the planning director, hires all of the positions, typically except for the position of city judge, which is selected by the city commission. It's an effective method to manage a city. Now, in Hendersonville's situation, it got into a political quagmire and they voted it out, but I think that was a mistake of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But nevertheless, that happened. But one of the analogies that I pointed out to other people in the past is Hendersonville's commissioners were elected at large. Hendersonville is primarily a single race community. There's not a lot of races other than whites there in Hendersonville. So the commissioners were elected at large. Well, when the commissioners are elected at large, in this case, I had 5 people who reported to me if I'm a private citizen. If I'm a voter and I'm a citizen, I've got a right to elect all 5 of those commissioners. And if I don't like something that's happening, I can tell any of those 5 or all of those 5 I'm not for that. When you look at the mayor-alderman charter that you have in Hendersonville now, I can object every day to something happening, and yet the people who vote in a zoning change or people who vote in something that occurs, they don't answer to me at the ballot box. The majority of those people answer to someone else. And I can tell my commissioners or I can tell my alderman I'm against something, and they can both vote against it. And I can tell the mayor and he can vote against it if he has a right to vote on it. But yet that matter can pass, and none of those people that voted for it answer to me at the ballot box. Where under the city commission charter, every one of them answer to me. And so that's the fallacy in that. Now, talking about the city manager as it might relate to Gallatin. Hendersonville came up with what I think was a pretty decent compromise. There was a push on under the current mayor-alderman form of government in Hendersonville to have a city administrator and basically do away with the managerial authority of the mayor. Mayor would be, in essence, chairman of the board, and he would in turn have little administrative power. A compromise allowed the appointment of, and I don't recall the term, but appointment of basically an administrator to oversee the day-to-day mundane operation of the city, looking at the personnel matters and looking at the tax matters and looking at all of the detailed matters, while still retaining the mayor with mayoral authority. And so they've come up with a good compromise, in my opinion, and have selected a very capable individual to be the administrator. Gallatin could do the same thing. Hendersonville is under what is known as a General Act charter, which means in Tennessee now you can only adopt certain charters to operate under. Gallatin has a private act charter, which means that their charter must be amended by the state legislature whenever a change is to be made. But Gallatin certainly could implement a procedure to allow an administrator, at least with certain limited authority, to be ongoing running the city while still having mayoral elections and different mayors take office. Because some of these people, unfortunately, are not capable, even though they may be a good vote getter and may be a popular individual, are not capable of managing a city municipal government with 300 or 400 or 500 employees. I mean, it's a big corporation. It's probably the biggest corporation in Gallatin, or one of the biggest.
Right.
And so there is a lot of responsibility and knowledge necessary to run these things. So put somebody in there that knows how to do it, let them stay in the background, and let the mayor continue to have a significant role, while you've got somebody that can look out for all the details that have to be looked out for when you're in charge of a city of that size. I mean, that's just, and Hendersonville, through their efforts, have come up with a way to do it, which I'm happy about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of trade-offs there too, but it's there's an opportunity, I think, and it's maybe a tough conversation to have right in the midst of a election year, and there's a lot on the line with that. But I do think the city manager position is something that we should be thinking about as a...
Well, you don't have to call it city manager. You can call it city administrator or some other term, city coordinator. I mean, the term. Don't let the term get in the way of effectively establishing that position to oversee the day-to-day activities of the city, while the mayor still can be involved in the major decision making.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I think. I think people get hung up on these terms too.
You're totally right that it does. The misnomers or whatever the name suggests does trigger more than it should. So, all right, we're going to have to wrap up, which is an unfortunate reality. But if we can, I wanted to touch on more of your Rotarian service. I think that says so much. It just speaks volumes about the kind of character that you have and that you bring to these different situations. But maybe thinking a little bit about that and civic involvement and the way leadership continues to evolve and the ways that this community continues to evolve. What gives you hope for the future of Sumner County?
Well, I certainly think that people are taking a much more active role now than they did 50 years ago in the operation of the county. One of the big differences that occurred is the one man, one vote rule. Hendersonville at one time, even though Hendersonville was population-wise bigger than Gallatin, only had 2 county commissioners, where the majority of the county commissioners were located in Gallatin and even north of Gallatin. And so that went to federal court back in about 1972 or so, and it was established that you have a broader selection process for the county commission, which opened up the involvement of many of the Hendersonville county commissioners now, or their predecessors. But in essence, I think that's one of the big changes that's happened over the last 50, 60 years. The other thing that I think has a role in this is that people are taking much more interest in it than they used to, because much of it may be related to their pocketbook, but nevertheless, there appears to be much more interest. It used to be we couldn't find people to run for some of these offices. We would have to ask people to run, and they said, no, I don't want to do that, even though they could run and not have opposition. But now there's a much different perspective about it, and people are actually desiring to be in those positions. And I know from experience that once you are involved in these activities, they become significantly important to you.
Yeah.
Many of these people, once they get involved and once they start learning about it, become very interested in holding on to that position. So I think that's how it's evolved.
Sure.
I see that, through my own activities as well as the activities of others that are run.
Well, I'm with you. I think everybody should get involved, and there's a whole lot of people out there that a whole lot more that are interested than I've seen in the past, but there's still opportunity to plug in. So maybe we'll leave that as our final thought.
All right.
Get involved and
that's it.
Learn more history with Louis Oliver. Thank you, Judge.
Okay.
Appreciate your time.
Happy to be here.
Till next time.